If there's one superhero who gets the medal for overexposure in the last 50 years, I'd argue it's Batman. But that doesn't mean I don't get why that happened, and I'm not to some degree complicit in driving sales. He is, simply put, one of the most fascinating of superheroes, and because he has no powers, he's one of the easiest to translate into a variety of creative styles. We've had so much Batman media since Tim Burton's original live-action film that it's easy to say that we've said all that needs to be said with him. We've since had 8 live-action films, 4 or 5 animated series, countless animated direct-to-video and theatrical releases, and several video games. But here's the dirty little secret about Batman. The reason he's so popular is because he's been blessed with several fantastic adventures in each of those mediums. The Dark Knight and Batman '89 are widely respected and highly influential in cinema regardless of their superhero roots. Batman the Animated Series is considered one of the best animated shows of all time, and has even created its own classic characters like Harley Quinn. Mask of the Phantasm, Return of the Joker, and Under the Red Hood rival the quality of any of the live-action films. Arkham Asylum and Arkham City are often found on greatest video games of all time lists from both fans and critics. And in comics, The Dark Knight Returns was cited by Time magazine in 2005 as one of the 10 best English-language graphic novels ever written. So given his coveted status amongst superheroes, it saddens me that most folks haven't yet made the plunge to try out some of his printed works in comics. I guess I can understand it to a point. Having printed words with illustrations can be jarring for some folks because it can be a little counterintuitive to read and follow each panel in the correct order. Plus, people might not be aware that not all comics are ongoing stories where you need to keep up with every monthly issue. A good chunk are sold in retrospective collective editions. And finally, despite efforts depicting quite mature situations and stories, a lot of folks stubbornly insist that superheroes are meant exclusively for kids, which makes me laugh imagining an 8-year-old reading something like The Killing Joke or watching 2017's Logan with their parents. But for everyone else who is a little more open-minded, I'd like to offer my suggestions about where to start with Batman when getting into his comics. There are plenty of other lists and articles I've seen covering this topic already, yet I've noticed most don't bother to make the distinction between good starting points for newcomers and their personal favorites, and I think that distinction is important, otherwise you'll be dropping a complete Batman neophyte into something like No Man's Land or The Black Mirror, stories deeply rooted in ongoing continuity and may lose some of their appeal if you're unaware of general Batman comic history. Not to say that people will be completely lost with those, but that it might be better to start with something a little more clean-cut. These are the 5 stories where I'd recommend commencing your Bat journey in print, depending on your background with the character and what you're looking for. Origin stories can be tricky, as a sense of mystery really adds to a character, and a lot of origin stories tack on pointless extra material to a rather simple beginning, making the piece feel disjointed. However, some of the best tales in superhero fiction are origin stories, and Batman Year One is often regarded as one of, if not the, best Batman stories ever written. Done by Frank Miller with art by David Mazzucchelli, both noted for their seminal work on reinventing Marvel's Daredevil, Year One covers, appropriately, the first year of Batman's career. It starts with Bruce Wayne coming back into Gotham after his long absence and depicts how he came to don the guise of a bat-themed Avenger to strike fear into the hearts of criminals. But the story is also paralleled with the emergence of a young Lieutenant James Gordon, who is reluctantly transferred to Gotham and does the best job he can within a corrupt police department on the payroll of the mob. If this all sounds familiar, that's because Year One has been the guiding work behind a lot of early career Batman stories afterwards. I would argue that Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins is an adaptation of Year One with extra material added and the focus shifted to Bruce. Mask of the Phantasm takes a lot of cues from Year One as well. And the video game Arkham Origins is definitely looking at this, and another story on the list for inspiration. Year One came out in 1987 and was part of an initiative by DC to clean up the convoluted universe and its many timelines. This is the same initiative that gave us John Byrne's The Man of Steel and George Perez's Wonder Woman, which were just as influential for those characters. But Year One is usually considered the best of the three. It helped immensely to correct the public perception of the general tone and style of Batman stories after the '66 TV show, and it is still the favorite depiction of a lot of fans for the beginning of the Caped Crusader. If you only want to read one Batman story and you don't have much familiarity with the character, start here. With its popularity, Year One cast a long shadow over subsequent efforts, and even had a number of direct sequels. It did serve as the main origin story within the so-called Prime Batman continuity for a time, but there were a lot of other disparate stories using it to inform their own unique timelines. Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, Eisner Award-winning creators of comics during the 90s, have said many times Year One is their favorite Batman story. So it's no surprise that they couldn't resist doing their own limited series sequel, using the mobs as a starting place and ramping up to the costume freaks that make up Batman's rogues gallery. Thus, The Long Halloween was born, and has been nearly as influential on subsequent Batman stories as Year One, even if it's not quite as good. Nolan's seminal work, The Dark Knight, from 2008, Matt Reeves' The Batman from 2022 and the subsequent Penguin TV show, and the Gotham TV show all wear this story's influence on their sleeves. It's a year-long tale about a serial killer that plagues the criminal underworld, targeting mostly the mob forces, and Batman forms a united front with Gordon and Harvey Dent to stop them. The Long Halloween is probably the best exploration into the origin of Two-Face, a favorite villain of mine, and one who I often think isn't quite treated right in other Batman stories. He does develop an alternate personality which clashes with the good man he once was, but he's not so obsessed with duality that he can't make a decision without his coin. It's because he believes justice is random, and so relies on the coin to decide the fates of his victims because it's the only impartial judge. This story really shows how Dent could be brought to this belief so completely, and it uses Gordon and Batman as contrasts to show people don't have to give in to despair despite the seeming hopelessness around them. It also has some fun with the longer format, allowing for a lot of the regular Batman villains to play a part in the story, such as the Joker, the Riddler, Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, and the Calendar Man. I'd recommend this story as a good starting point for people familiar with the more recent screen works of the last 25 years and would like to see something closer to those. It also works just fine as both a standalone piece and as a sequel to Year One, so it can be enjoyed by a lot of folks. It also has a sequel series by the same creators called Dark Victory, which is nearly as good and makes a great case for why Robin adds something essential to the Batman mythology. A big unspoken character of Batman stories is Gotham City itself. Batman strives hard to clean up the filth of the streets and inspire the good people to rise up, but what happens when the true controlling force behind the city starts to fight back? The Court of Owls is one of the most fascinating more recent villain groups of the comics, and their first emergence stands as a great story for any Batman fan. Bruce Wayne launches a new initiative to get the city back to its Golden Age roots, and a mysterious new foe, which inspired a children's bedtime rhyme, is revealed to be real but extremely elusive. They drive Batman nearly to insanity in his determination to bring them out into the light, and demonstrates how powerful a whispered fear can be. Written by Scott Snyder and drawn by Greg Capullo as part of the New 52 line, this story takes place during an established Batman's career, with him having had multiple Robins at this point, and yet is extremely accessible to people because it doesn't rely on a knowledge of long-running continuity. It's instead closer to the methodology of someone like director James Gunn, dropping an audience into an established world and giving newcomers enough to go on. That's not to say that this is a quippy, brightly colored world. On the contrary, this story builds a great atmosphere, has quite a bit of dark symbolism, is a great detective story, and features one of the most twisted, nightmarish sequences in the regular Batman comics. This sequence even has you physically turn the comic in order to follow along, and it's a great way to involve the reader into the story. And it's a solid argument against the common criticism of Batman being overpowered, as this sequence will show you a bruised, tattered, and broken Batman unlike anything you've seen before. I find this to be a solid initiation point if you grew up on Batman the Animated Series, or love the Batman Arkham video games, but I think any general fan will get something from this. Elseworlds is one of my favorite project lines from DC. It's the same idea as Marvel's What If. Take notable characters, place them in a new context by changing an aspect of their world, and see what happens. Batman Dracula Red Rain brings a supernatural element to the grounded world of Gotham. The notion of Batman as a vampire is one that crops up a lot. It's even explicitly acknowledged in Tim Burton's original film. But this version actually lets us live in a world with vampires, led by the actual Dracula who invade Gotham. At first, Bruce is clearly outmatched by these supernatural foes, but with the help of a mysterious woman named Tanya, he starts to retaliate hard, adopting new, unproven methods to fight back against the Lord of the Undead. Superheroes as our modern mythology is very much in vogue in live-action works, particularly the Zack Snyder DC films. But this story depicts a clash between two mythologically drenched creatures of the night and see how each influences the other. What this story is not is simply Batman fighting Dracula for 100 pages. What it is an examination of how Bruce struggles between his humanity and his monster to serve the people as the Dark Knight, using the presence of Dracula to cause a shakeup to the world's status quo in ways that even someone like the Joker couldn't accomplish. Beautifully illustrated by Kelly Jones, if you've only experienced the live-action or animated Batman works, this will be a literal treat. None of the current crop of superhero cinema has been handled quite like this, and it makes for an unforgettable experience. Red Rain did spawn 2 sequels, which are often paired with it in collections, so I don't think there's any good reason not to read them as well. However, they aren't nearly as good, and they can get quite goofy in places, with almost cartoonish artwork in Crimson Mist. Regardless, Elseworlds allows creators a freedom not often afforded in the business, and while not every attempt strikes gold, I wouldn't want to live in a world where this kind of magic can't happen on occasion. If you want a crash course in what Batman stories can be about, Black and White is for you. An anthology printed in, you guessed it, black and white, the idea is to give noted writers and artists 8 pages to do whatever they'd like with the Batman universe and publish them together. There's no coherent plot running through the tales, no need to worry about canonicity, or even if the take is a grounded, more straightforward one. This is a pure artistic distillation of what the industry and fans think of Batman, and it covers a lot of fascinating notions. Being an anthology, it of course means not all the stories and artwork are great, but several will stay with you. My favorite is A Black and White World by Neil Gaiman, which imagines the adventures of Batman as stories played out by paid theatrical actors. I also recommend Two of a Kind by Bruce Timm, who is one of the guys behind the animated series from the 90s, Bent Twigs by Bill Sienkiewicz, and An Innocent Guy by Brian Boland. There are several volumes with the name Black and White, as this idea is repeated with new artists and writers every few years, so the logical place to start is Volume 1, which is also, in my opinion, the best of the collections. A truly novel way to experience a myriad of Batman takes in a short amount of time. Once you've tried out some of these, I think you'll have enough of a foundation to go on and tackle most of the rest of Batman's adventures. There are plenty of others I could have recommended, such as The Killing Joke, Son of the Demon, Gotham by Gaslight, and The Dark Knight Returns. But I think each of those work a bit better after you've dipped your toes into a few other stories first, and I tried to put together a list that was a little less obvious and more suited towards the crowd of general non-comics reading Batman fans. And that's not to say that those aren't great stories. The Dark Knight Returns is my favorite Batman tale in any medium. Son of the Demon might be one of the finest Ra's al Ghul stories ever put together. Gotham by Gaslight is another great look into the Elseworlds line, this time imagining Batman in a Victorian London setting. And The Killing Joke is still heralded as the definitive Joker story, even if there are others that have been done since that I personally like more. Whatever route you go, I promise that with enough effort and persistence, you'll find a story that will remind you that one of the key traits of Batman's longevity is his versatility. Even after we get 20 additional live-action films with him, there will still be other takes and versions that we could do that will feel as fresh and interesting as our first Batman film did to us. Whenever that signal light hits the sky, it's not just a call, it's a warning to the superstitious and cowardly lot that the night still holds terror for the corrupt and evil.